Welcome to Sales Bites by Journey, where we talk about everything you need to know to be a killer at sales. I'm your host, Will Jenkins. Let's get it.
Hello. Welcome to Sales Bites by Journey. My name is Will Jenkins, and I'll be your host, CEO, and founder of Journey. Today, we have Mike Beckwith, VP of Brokerage at FreightPlus. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Man, so crazy enough, you just reminded me that we go super far back to the Coyote days.
Yeah, I was about to say, I probably met you 8-9 years ago whenever Access America got purchased by Coyote.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. It's crazy to think there are so many people that have gone through either of those organizations and are at the vice president level and building businesses and going to do a thing, man. A lot of talent coming through those two businesses over time.
Absolutely. It's awesome to see a lot of your colleagues going out and building better businesses out there. And it's been great to watch.
It's the best. It's a lot of fun, man. So, appreciate you being here today. As we go ahead and get started, I would love to just have you tell us like a quick 10,000 foot overview of your background before we dive into some of your sales topics.
Yeah. So, as you said earlier, I'm the vice president of Brokerage today, but, I think like most people in the industry, I got here by accident. I was serving tables and bartending at a local spot in Chattanooga, and had a beer with the right guy at the right time that was looking for someone that just had the right mindset, had the right hustle, and he was like, "You want a career in logistics? You ever thought about that?" And I remember going back to the back of the kitchen and asking Siri, Siri, what is logistics? Because I had no idea. I didn't go to school for it. I actually wound up dropping out of college after a couple of years, and got my first gig at Access America Transport, learning the ropes, learning cold calling and sales. It was a cradle to grave environment, and as you know, Coyote bought us about a year after my time there, and then it spiraled into UPS. And, by the time I left Coyote after a 7-year tenure, I was overseeing 3 or 4 offices, in the Southeast area. And, most recently I jumped to another company to help, as a director of sales, build up a Chattanooga branch, managing a few of their offices. And then my current stints, shipped up to Boston to help, FreightPlus, who's a managed trans provider, historically, that's been, growing like a bad weed, and they didn't have the brokerage services. They didn't have that transactional solution for their clients. And so, now today I'm over sales operations and client success for that division of the business.
Man, that's awesome. I got a chance to get a little bit acquainted with Steve a few months back, just learn a little bit more about FreightPlus. You all have a very unique offering. So it's cool to see what you're able to build out and the services that you all can provide. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. And, I think my favorite thing about the team is just how diverse the group is. Steve particularly comes from an Amazon background. And, as you know, from that behemoth of a company, they've got certain ways of doing things that help them grow tremendously. And so we're, seeing some of those practices brought in, just a fresh perspective on how to grow a business, mixed with a bunch of really great people from the freight industry now. I mean, it's one of the strongest leadership groups I've had the pleasure of working with. And it's been a really cool experience so far.
That's awesome, man. So as we get started here, I always love to start with a fun fact. So what you got for us? Yeah.
So this is a weird one for me, but, so as I said, I'm a college dropout, right? Went to University of Tennessee at Chattanooga for a couple of years, didn't really know what I was there for, and just wound up getting into the working world, in the food industry. And, my career's taken me a lot of places, but one of the weirdest ones that it has taken me is having that same university reach back out to me and ask me to be an instructor at their supply chain academy that they were building up for the local area. So yeah, it was, to not have a college degree, then to get to, teach at the same college I had dropped out of. That's probably one of my favorite fun facts, because you don't hear about that happening too often. I was really blessed to have that opportunity and get to do that. I had a natural calling to teaching. My grandfather was a professor at Clemson, so it was something I wanted to try out naturally. So, but that was a really cool experience to get to do that for a couple years.
We're going to dive in and talk about setting the tone for the day. So mindset, prep, early morning cold call, stuff like that. So let's dive in, man. What type of stuff you have for us there?
Yeah. When I'm working with my junior sellers, especially, I would say mindset's probably the hardest thing, especially as you talk about cold calling. Is it's not the sexiest thing that you do in your day, right?
Yeah.
I would say little things like, if you really want to set the tone for the day, call your favorite customer, right? That first phone call that goes well, that's positive, that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the day, right? So, starting with the winning attitude, getting in your head and like just working through some of the, we always call the phone the 800-pound gorilla on the desk, right? It's like the hardest thing to get accustomed to. And I know it's tough for me early on in the industry, especially, again, I didn't know logistics. I didn't really know what it was. And that's what we find a lot of the staff that we're hiring into the industry is, right? I mean, was part of the brilliance of Coyote was their training program and them getting individuals to get a little bit more confident with the role that they were doing. So, when you start off your day, it's I always talk about the 3 C's when it comes to sales, right? Confidence, clarity, consciousness, right? You need to be alert and aware. You need to be able to think on your toes, be light on your feet. You got to be able to build rapport with your clients. And sometimes those 9 a.m. phone calls, those cold calls, people hadn't really digested their coffee yet. People aren't really ready for that. So you gotta be able to really be confident with yourself and confident with what you're doing. And I think the way you start your day is just so incredibly important.
Man, I've been listening to the same book every day in the morning for the last 9 years. It's called The Strangest Secret by Earl Nightingale. It's 37 minutes long. And the concept of starting your day on the right foot is so accurate because it gets me realigned mentally to focus on the things that I want to go do and the things that I'm willing to go work to go build. But as a rep, cold call is hard enough as is. So let's go ahead and get the day started positive in the right direction before it starts to freight's crazy. So let's get it started right.
Yeah. And you see most individuals, especially as you get in the career, they're trying to find the flow of things. They're trying to get in their rhythm, right? And I think, especially for me growing up in the industry, it was, my mornings were best spent in my head doing a lot of research, right? And I eventually, as I grew in the industry, learned that I needed to spend that time planning, right? Like I needed to have an agenda for my day. Like we are in freight. So things are going to come up. Things are going to pull your attention away from, pushing those outbound dials. You got a load that you need to rescue or something breaks down, whatever. We've all seen it take place. But really what we try to get back focused to is really that planning phase. When are you going to block off your day to make cold calls and get your head right for that game, right? That way you're not just kind of going through the motions and you're hitting your KPIs just to hit your KPIs, right? It's that quality over quantity type approach. And that really starts with the planning phase, right? Like when are you going to take time to do research? When are you going to take time to follow up with a certain customer base, and working your pipeline, not as an entirety group, but in different stages, right? Like you got your prospects that you're doing your first outreach with, that you're going to basically say the same kind of things. You've got this idea of not really your pitch, but your value proposition that you're ready to fire with. And then you got your subset of customers that you've already spoken to. You're more in that negotiate and close type phase of the relationship. I try to say, like, you want to block those grouping of cold calls together, right? Because it's a different switch, right? It's building rapport to really focusing on the follow up, the follow through, the really selling the value piece of it. So I always tell my guys, like, look, whenever you go to sit down and plan your day, make sure that you're being really strict about how you're blocking your times off, right? Time management in this game is so incredibly important and valuable.
So important.
And if you're just making cold calls every hour, all the time through, by the afternoon, your brain's going to be dead. And that's why I go back to the 3 C's, right? Clarity, confidence, consciousness. by the afternoon, you lose a little bit of consciousness by your 100th dial, right? So take the time to make sure you can go, hit 30 phone calls in an hour. Take some time, energize yourself, take a walk around the office, do what you need to do, maybe check on some freight, but give yourself a mental block to get back into the operation and kind of switch hats, if you will, and have a plan for that. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes you got to scrap the plan by 11 o'clock because things are hitting the fan and customers are throwing freight at your way. But that's kind of really the point there, though, is you need to come in with a plan, and you need to expect the unexpected. You know that those things are going to take place, and making sure you're together on that.
So one thing that I like that you mentioned is the preparation aspect. I think you laid a great base on start the day strong, set the tone. We're going to go do our thing. Preparation is a big part of that. So if I were a new rep on your team, and let's just say Monday is my first day in sales, I got my lead list, I'm going to go do my thing. Give me some prep stuff I could do the Friday before I leave to come in Monday and be ready to rock.
Yeah, so I always make sure that my guys are well informed about a customer's business, especially before you make your first phone call. Like, you got to know what they do and how they do it, right? And especially for a brand new seller, I always tell them to focus in one industry to start off with. Understand the nuances of that industry, whether you're going after food product, your flatbed business with steel manufacturers, whatever that may be. Understand what that looks like and talk to your colleagues, right? I think a lot of junior sellers don't want to ask questions because they feel dumb, right? Like they have you have this mental block inside your head. It's like, if I ask this question, I'm going to sound like an idiot. My boss is already going to think less of me, right? And the reality is that's the exact opposite. Some of the most successful sellers I've worked with are the ones that go out and ask other leadership for advice or opinions, right? So I always tell them, like, hey, collaborate a little bit in the mornings. Talk to somebody that knows freight and say, hey, I'm going to go make a focus on these 100 customers that are in this space. What can you tell me about the freight characteristics so I can sound more informed before I make those calls? Because you're going in and talking to a flatbed customer, they're going to care about PPE gear on site. They're going to talk about project management. They're going to care about, tarping, things of that nature. And it's always really important to understand, what exactly it is you're selling. Because I think that's, at least for me, that was a huge disconnect. Like at Access America Transport, when I first started, there was no training program. It was, here's a phone, here's a computer, now sell freight. And everything I had to learn was, I was asking a colleague beside me, I'm like, hey, you work with a customer that's just like this one that's prospecting. What are the nuances of it? What does the customer really care about? What do they value? And in that way, when I pick up the phone, I feel more confident already. I'm like, okay, I know what this guy's probably going to want to hear. And then obviously it's, we'll talk about this a little later, but it's the difference of getting out of the rhythm of a pitch. I think new sellers come and they want to be really pitchy right off the bat. It's like, hey, we're a top freight, company in the industry. Would love the opportunity to earn your business. And the reality is that we're building relationships. And then that's the other thing that I always try to stress the most is don't get to know the business until you get to know the person. So we try to do some exercises in the morning, especially of like, just some cold call, mock calling exercises, if you will, with some of those guys, just to get their heads focused, right? Get them in the rhythm and then let them loose,
It's funny that you say that because we have been very heavily implementing a tool that allows people to role play in a mock environment. It's super cool. So you call these bots, they role play back with you the same way decision makers would. We have cold bots, discovery bots, warm bots, check-in bots, but it's to do exactly what you said. Let's get warmed up. Let's get in the rhythm of how this is supposed to go. Let's build some rapport. Okay, boom. I did that 15, 20 minutes. I got some feedback in the system about how I did. It just helps to get the juices flowing. It's like going to go play a sport and not warming up before you hit the court or the field. Like, you're going to pull a hammy, right? You got to get warmed up.
Yeah, same reference too.
Dude, you can't be doing that. So one of the things I want to mention that you brought up, I love, and I think it's super important for training new reps, is asking people for help to understand the freight profile of an account, even if you're not a freight veteran. That can accelerate the lead cycle so much because if you understand small nuances and on that cold call, you hit some things that make it sound like you know what you're talking about. You don't have to have all the answers. So how can a new person just really dig in? I don't want to steal your thunder too much, but man, for prep, like new people, sometimes they don't know all the buzzwords. They don't know like what to say to make people feel comfortable about their expertise.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, there are softwares out there now, at least the company we're at now, we're going to get to this at some point, but in our previous organization, we would take really good sales calls, especially the ones that are on Teams and we can record. And maybe I'd suggest start the day that way, right? Like, we don't have to do a mock exercise. How about you watch a veteran handle this kind of thing, right? Like, to that, it's the same thing. Again, going back to the sports analogy, you watch game footage, it allows you to know what you need to do for the next game, right? And watching an experienced player, have a really great, 10, 15 minutes of building a rapport during a meeting and then having a good quality, 15, 20 minutes on the back half talking about the business and really asking the right questions. I think that's the other thing that we always want to make sure that they're prepared with is like, we've got a big call planner, right? We've written all these open-ended questions down. I think for me, you'll see a veteran be able to rattle off open-ended questions because they've rehearsed it. They know it. They know what the client probably thinks is important at that point. So they ask questions to lead the conversation in the direction they want, where, your new guys are usually going to ask those yes or no questions just out of, they're like, do you guys work with brokers yet? And they're like, right. It's not like, how do you work with carrier partners and what do you value about those relationships, right? What does good look like to you? And, getting them to understand, like, it's a different way of talking. To your point, it's a muscle you got to warm up. It's one you got to warm up in your mind, and getting some time to really just kind of understand, like having your quick 10 questions that you're ready to riff and run with, like the most important things you want to know as a broker, right? Like when you have contracted business come up, like that type of stuff. How do you manage your business today? What are your KPIs? Do you scorecard your carriers? Getting into that kind of the more meat of the practice, because I had a background in operations. This from working with me at Coyote. I didn't really get into the sales role officially until probably 3-4 years ago. And I was always a very technical seller on the operations side. I always cared about how a customer looked at it. It really defined what good is. I know I said that earlier, but that to me is really when you get into the meat of the relationship, right? Like that's when you get into what keeps them up at night. What's the things that they're trying to accomplish to make themselves look good to their leadership at their company. That's the stuff you want to care about as a sales rep, right?
Totally. Man, you're just spitting hot fire there, Mike. Sounds like a thing or two about this whole sales game, man. I'm going to recap a few things, and then if I miss anything or you have anything else to add, let me know. So setting the tone for the day, mindset, preparation, early morning cold calls. So mindset is super important. One of the ways to start is to call someone, maybe a customer you've got a good relationship with, to get that flow going, have a good conversation early. You mentioned the 3 C's, confidence, clarity, and consciousness, which is really cool. You mentioned spacing out your calls. So hit them early, do your call block, maybe take a walk, come down a little bit, boom, do your thing, because we all know that in freight specifically, by the end of the day, your brain's probably mush. So you're probably not going to make your best cold calls after you've been battling freight all day. You also mentioned preparation. Yeah, it's crazy world. You mentioned preparation being a big deal. So be well informed about the customer's business. And you can do that by asking people for help and collaborating with your teammates. And then one thing that's really interesting, you said, don't get to know the business until you get to know the person. So build that rapport, earn your stripes, earn the opportunity to dig in there with people. And then another cool one is to watch and listen to best practices, like see people do the job well and figure out how you can emulate that and make it part of your sales process. So anything that I missed or that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would like to add one thing. I think the other thing from the junior seller standpoint is we work a lot on authenticity. You as a person, because when I got into sales, first and foremost, I thought I was selling a company, right? I think you naturally feel that way. You're selling a service. The reality is you're selling yourself first and foremost, right? That client's not going to buy from you if they don't feel like they trust you. And I think a lot of junior sellers are afraid of that vulnerability with themselves being vulnerable with the client, being able to crack a joke and feel comfortable about it, and being able to show them their true colors and what they're passionate about, what makes them tick as people. And that's a big thing that we talk about too, is really getting comfortable in that uncomfortable space of being able to come to a customer and, just having a lighthearted conversation. Like I'm a big outdoorsman. It's something I like to talk about. It's something I like to go do. So whenever I, talking to somebody in the Southeast and I'm on a Zoom call like this and I see a deer head in the background, the first thing I'm gravitating towards, right? Like I'm trying to find some commonality, some common ground. And I think that's a big thing of what we do. I think, you see a lot of sales technique and skill videos out there talking about how do you differentiate yourself or how do you differentiate your services as a business. And really you got to differentiate yourself first, right? Like are you connecting with them as the individual and building a strong relationship that would leave outside the industry, right? And that's always something that I always find extremely important, because you hear these guys, you listen to the recordings of these guys' phone calls, and I couldn't tell who that person is. I can hear the voice. I've heard the voice on the phone before. I know who it is, but you're not showing me who you are. And I think that's what a customer really wants. I mean, I guess, it's just basic friendship, right? Like if you go out in the world and you go meet somebody, you want to get to know who they are. And those same principles apply here within the professional world too.
Totally. It really matters finding your voice, being who you are. It's good to model best practices from other people, but you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. Like you have to be who you are, because people can tell when you're not being authentic. So I think that's a great point, man. It does take people some time to find their voice, because sometimes it's a little scary to be authentic and be yourself. So
absolutely.
This was awesome, Mike. I really appreciate you taking some time to share some sales bites with us here. We look forward to hearing more about what you have to say sales-wise. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.